Hello and welcome. I'm Sameer Arshad Khatlani, and today we look beyond the battlefield headlines to understand what may be the most consequential dimension of the ongoing conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran. US President announced a 5-day pause in military operations in Iran. At first glance, a pause might sound like a step toward de-escalation, but the timing of this announcement reveals something deeper. Because the war is no longer about missiles, airstrikes, or strategic targets. It's increasingly about energy, the global economy, and the long term stability of the Persian Gulf. And that's why the real story begins. When the United States and Israel launched strikes on Iran, analysts initially feared one specific scenario that Iran might shut down the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through roughly a fifth of the world's oil passes. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has been seen as the ultimate pressure point in any confrontation with Iran. If closed, it could trigger an immediate global energy crisis. But what is unfolding now may be even more significant. Instead of simply threatening shipping lanes, the conflict has moved into a new and more dangerous phase: direct attacks on energy infrastructure. The shift changes the nature of the war. Closing a shipping route might disrupt supply temporarily, but damaging gas fields, refineries, and export terminals can create economic consequences that might last for months or even years. In other words, the battlefield is expanding from geography to systems. In recent days, Iran has reportedly carried out massive strikes on some of the most critical energy facilities in the Persian Gulf region. Among them was the Ras Laffan in Qatar, one of the world's largest energy complexes. The site is not just another refinery. It produces roughly one fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, the fuel that heats homes, powers industries, and keeps electricity flowing across parts of Asia and Europe. Think about that for a moment. A single strike on such a facility doesn't just affect one country. It has ripple effects across continents, from factories in East Asia to households in Europe. And this is precisely why economists and policymakers are warning now that the war could trigger long-term damage, not just short-term shocks. Iran has targeted refineries and gas infrastructure in Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, following earlier attacks by Israel on Iran's South Pars gas field, which itself is one of the largest natural gas reserves on Earth. What we're witnessing is something rarely acknowledged in daily headlines: an emerging energy war layered on top of a military conflict. Why Trump announced a pause? This brings us back to Donald Trump's 5-day pause announcement. Officially, such pauses are often framed as opportunities for diplomacy, reassessment, or humanitarian considerations. But in geopolitical terms, pauses can also signal something else: concern about escalation that could spiral beyond control. Energy infrastructure attacks are a red line for global economy. Unlike military bases, energy networks are deeply interconnected and fragile. Damages to them can trigger fuel shortages, rising global prices, supply chain disruptions, and financial market instability. Already, energy markets are reacting nervously. When infrastructure becomes a target, investors begin to factor in not just war risk but long term production losses. That changes everything. A 5-day pause, therefore, may reflect not just military calculations but economic alarm bells ringing across the world capitals. The global stakes include: the Persian Gulf may remain the heart of the Persian Gulf remains the heart of the energy system. Even in an era of renewable energy, the world still relies heavily on oil and natural gas flowing from the region. Asia, in particular, is deeply dependent on LNG supplies from the Gulf. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and India, and parts of Southeast Asia rely on shipments to keep their economies running. If energy infrastructure in the region suffers sustained damage, the consequences could include higher electricity prices worldwide, slower economic growth, inflationary pressures, and renewed global geopolitical tensions over energy security. In many ways, the war is beginning to resemble past memories in history, when conflicts in the Middle East reshaped global economy, such as the oil shocks of the 1970s. But there's one crucial difference today. The world economy is already dealing with fragile supply chains, climate transition pressures, and geopolitical fragmentation. Another prolonged energy disruption could push the system into an era of economic uncertainty. There is also a strategic logic behind the targeting of energy assets. For Iran, striking energy infrastructure in Gulf sends a clear message. If Iran's economy and energy sector are attacked, the broader regional energy will not remain untouched. This is a form of deterrence through economic vulnerability. It signals that the costs of war will not be confined to one country. Instead, the consequences will be shared by allies, markets, and consumers worldwide. And that makes escalation far riskier for all sides. The key question now is what happens when the 5-day pause ends? Does it open the door to diplomacy, or is it simply a temporary halt before another round of escalation? History suggests that pauses in conflicts often serve multiple purposes at once: military regrouping, diplomatic messaging, and economic recalibration. But the longer this conflict touches energy infrastructure, the harder it becomes to return to normal. Because rebuilding damaged facilities, restoring investor confidence, and stabilizing markets takes far longer than launching missiles. That's why economists are increasingly warning that the true impact of the war may only begin to appear months from now. There's a broader lesson emerging from this movement. Modern wars are no longer fought only on battlefields, they're fought through financial systems, supply chains, technology networks, and increasingly energy infrastructure. And when those systems are targeted, the entire world becomes part of the conflict ripple effects. Trump's announcement of a 5-day pause may therefore be more than a tactical move. It could be an acknowledgement that the conflict has entered a phase where economic consequences may become harder to control than military ones. The coming days will be critical. If the pause leads to de-escalation, it could prevent further damage to one of the most important energy regions in the world. But if attacks on infrastructure continue, the war may evolve into something even more consequential, a prolonged confrontation that reshapes global energy politics and the international economy. And that's something the world can ill afford right now. Thank you for listening to my Pluralist. I'm Sameer Arshad Khatlani. If you found this analysis useful, do share it, subscribe, and send your feedback or suggestions to Sameer, SAMER, 1707 at gmail.com. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged with the world's most important conversations. Thank you.